Alrighty, I think we are pretty close to our start time here, so we will get going. First of all, I just want to say hello to everyone and thank you for joining us on this rainy evening. Perfect time to be inside and learning a little bit about the world around us. Tonight we welcome Maria Noel Groves, who will lead us through a class highlighting some easy to grow herbs. Maria is a registered herbalist with a long list of qualifications, speaking engagements, and accolades. She is the owner of Wintergreen Botanicals Herbal Clinic and Education Center and is the best-selling author of Body in Balance and Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. If after tonight you are interested in hearing more from Maria, please check out Wintergreen Botanicals for class and workshop offerings. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Maria.
It looks like... Thank you. Yeah, I had muted myself just to make it so I wasn't cutting in earlier. Awesome. Thank you. I am super excited to be here. As some of you know, I am a huge fan of the Concord Food Co-op and have been an employee in the past and a wellness educator for a very long time as a volunteer. And I love education and I love teaching about herbs. And I've really started to enjoy teaching online. So this is just a perfect mix of many things all together. And as we're going into the growing season, it seemed like it would be really fun to feature a couple of my favorite herbs to grow, some of which you might be aware of and some of which you might not. And but they're all plants that are really easy to grow in the garden, particularly if you're in a temperate climate, which is like throughout most of the United States, including in New Hampshire. But if you happen to be from somewhere else, like, Texas or Florida or Southern California or Africa or Australia or someplace like that, then your ecosystem might be pretty different. So you might be able to grow some of these, but not necessarily all of them. But especially if you're from New Hampshire, these are really easy plants to grow. So I'm going to dive in. But I do want to note first and foremost that this is my garden here in the picture, and it's a glamour shot because really I live in a pretty humble spot. We just have a little ranch in the woods near Bear Brook State Park, but we have really developed the gardens over the years, and the previous owner, who had been here for almost 30 years, was also avidly into herbs and herbal medicine and flower essences. So I was very fortunate to come into a yard that already had a lot of medicinal plants, including some of the ones we're going to talk about today, like this beautiful purple Korean licorice mint plant. But then over the years, we've done more hardscaping and brought even more plants in, and it's just been really fun. But I came in not really being a gardener, being more of an academically minded herbalist. And so I learned by doing, and everything that I'm going to talk about today are all things that are really easy to do in, even semi-challenging gardening spots like New Hampshire, where our soil tends to be sandy and poor, and there might be a lot of shade or full sun or whatever it may be. And I apologize if my voice is a little scratchy. We were just doing some traveling, and there were a lot of short sleeping nights, and so now I've got a little bit of a scratchy throat, but we'll work through that. So we've got the slides and long notes. I also put that into the chat box. I'm just going to copy and paste that again, but you can basically go to the, well, that's not what I wanted to copy and paste. Don't mind me while my computer reminds things that I guess I'm not going to copy and paste it. It's not letting me do that from this angle. Fortunately, your screen has not been changing around like mine has. Let me bring my screen back up again. I will do it on my other computer, I guess. There you go. So the link there, which is just wintergreenbotanicals.com/class notes, or if you know how to do fancy things with QR codes, you can use that QR code. I have a very long set of notes, a very long set of slides, much longer than we'll cover today, as well as a whole big growing herbs, medicinal herbs chart that is a ebook extra for my book, Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. And so you can download all of those for free from that class notes page and have that for easy reference as well. And there are just recipes and info and all sorts of good stuff in those materials. I'm not going to go into all the details on my background, but it's there in the slides. And I do have my books, Body into Balance and Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies, which are really great. I'm a little biased, but they are really great herbals if you're wanting to learn more about medicinal herbs. Body into Balance is more about understanding the body and kind of the bigger picture of how to support the body with herbs, diet, and lifestyle. Whereas Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies is more like tonight's class, where we're going to be talking about medicinal herbs that you can easily grow in the garden. And then the book also goes into recipes that you can make. And both are organized by body system or health concern. And both are available, as far as I'm aware, with signed copies at the Concord Food Co-op. So if you happen to be at the store, you can pick it up from them there. And if you're online, I do sell and sign books, and they're also available elsewhere too. Lots of free information on my website in general, and a shameless plug for my home herbalist series that is starting in June. It is almost full for in-person spots. It's also simultaneously live streamed, and we have a larger audience capacity for that. And then I also have remedy kits that go with the series, and those are about 2/3 accounted for. But so we still have some space if anybody is interested, and that's on the classes page of my website. And another shameless plug for a local nonprofit that I do a lot of work with. The New Hampshire Herbal Network is hosting their annual Herb and Garden Day. And this year it's going to be at the Mount Kearsarge Indian Museum in Warner. And the Concord Food Co-op is actually a sponsor, one of our major sponsors for that. And it is a fantastic spot to buy herb plants from local organic growers. I don't sell plants. Sometimes I give plants away if people happen to be here for other things, but I don't sell plants, but there are a lot of really other amazing organic local medicinal herb seedling growers that will be there selling their plants. And there are also workshops and food and music and kids activities. So you can just use the QR code or bit.ly /herb and garden. It's pretty easy to Google as well. And I'm just going to do the safety rules super fast, but I do think this is important. So if you're not familiar with my safety rules, you can pause the recording if you're watching the recording, or you can look at the slides, or you can look at the notes. But of course, what I'm saying is not FDA approved. You should always consult with your physician before you start a new program, new herbs. Not everything is appropriate for everybody. And also when people are doing any kind of self-treatment, I always recommend, they should at least keep their doctor in the loop, but I also recommend researching an herb in at least a couple good resources, not just one spot. Listening to your body and your intuition, making sure the identity of the plant is 100%, and you can't entirely trust the tags that come with the plants. You want to do a little more digging to make sure they're correctly identified. And then last but not least, make sure that there aren't any herb drug interactions, which if you're working with an herbalist or a naturopathic doctor, we will generally do that research for you. But if you're not working with somebody and you're self-treating and you're on just like a couple medications, you might be able to just ask your pharmacist, and they may be able to do that research for you, and certainly also keep your doctor in the loop. But most doctors don't have that training in herb drug interactions. And I'm not telling you this because I want you to be my client, because while I'd love for you to be my student, I'm not even taking new clients at this time because I'm just too busy. But I do think that can be helpful to have the guidance of other fantastic herbalists in your journey, or naturopathic doctors. So, there are so many reasons why we might want to grow herbs, medicinal herbs specifically, in our garden. And some of the highlights, I think, are that, many of our medicinal plants are really easy to grow, oftentimes easier to grow than vegetables or flowers. They're just a little less picky, generally speaking. They don't require oftentimes as much water, as much maintenance. The animals don't usually want to eat them so much. So, you can often grow plants without too much difficulty, and they're easy to work with. Many of them, especially the ones we're going to focus on, are generally pretty safe for most people. They can be very affordable. Once you're growing plants and harvesting them, it's so much less expensive than buying pre-made herbal products. And so you can really be empowered in that process. It's just really exciting and empowering when you're not feeling well, or you just want to simply feel more vital, to be able to go out, walk out your door, pick a plant, make a remedy or chew on it or make a tea with it, and then feel better. It's just really like fun and really exciting. And a lot of people find that their whole world kind of shifts in a really positive way by connecting with the plants in this way. And so this is a great way to get started if you don't already, have any herbal background. And even if you do have some herbal training, it is a great way to kind of expand your garden with maybe some new herbs that you're not already growing. So, it's always possible for an herb to not agree with someone or to have some type of side effect. But generally speaking, medicinal herbs, and especially the ones we're talking about today, are usually pretty safe, usually have very few side effects, and are usually well tolerated by most people. And they're also often things that you can use in your cooking. Some of them are very beautiful, and many of them are very pollinator friendly as well. So you'll be bringing in, the bees and the butterflies and birds and other, really lovely critters that we really want to support in our garden. And you might even already be growing some of them too. So I already kind of went through this. If you happen to have the slides, if you download the slides, there is a little quick link. Whenever you see these underlined things, they will open up websites, articles, videos, things like that. That's off the PDF. The PDF of the slides, that is. So before we dive into, I'm going to mainly feature a couple plants in somewhat depth in today's talk. But first and foremost, I want to kind of give you a little bit of basics about harvesting and a little bit of remedy making, drying, because most people are going to be doing that as part of, their herbal preparations from their garden. Also, I encourage you, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. I'm going to take a look at it periodically as I work through my slides, or if we start to get really full up on time, I might end up waiting till the end to answer them, but most likely I'll be answering questions as we go. So if any questions pop up that pertain to tonight's class, please feel free to put those in the chat box. So while I say that, I'm going to move my chat box over so that I can see what you see. So harvesting leaves and flowers. Most of the plants that we're talking about, actually, I think, most of the plants we're going to talk about today are leaves and flowers, and most of the medicinal herbs that we tend to grow in the garden, we're going for their leaves and or their flowers. It depends on the plant. And that's pretty easy to harvest, especially leaves. That's usually what we can get the most abundance of and what's often the most sustainable to harvest from a plant without really negatively impacting it. And in fact, by periodically harvesting the leaves, you often will encourage the plant to be bigger and bushier and to have more growth and be more vital. It's interesting to think that for a lot of plants, getting harvested periodically and the right way will actually make it a stronger, happier, healthier plant for the sake of the plant itself than if you just let that one plant grow and grow and grow throughout the season and you never did anything, touched it, harvested it, or anything at all. Oftentimes it will be much bushier and more vibrant with that regular harvesting. And then you'll have access to plant material to eat and enjoy and make medicine with and experience. But there are some right and wrong ways to harvest your leafy parts. So if you just pluck off individual leaves, like you do and just pinch off one leaf, one leaf, one leaf, what happens is you're going to end up with this really leggy plant that's just a big stem with not much else. And it just kind of gets taller, but that is not going to be happier, healthier, or more vibrant. It's great if you just need to like trim off old leaves, or if you want to, thin out the plant a little bit. But what you really generally want to do is to pinch off above like where the leaves are going across. So instead of pulling off a leaf, you're trimming the main stem up above. So instead of pulling off this leaf here, you're going to trim up above that if you're just working with this, or maybe, a little further down above the next, little set of leaves. And what's going to happen there is that you'll have that above plant material to make medicine with. What's left behind is going to stimulate these little leaf nodes to grow. So you'll end up with like another branch here and another branch there. And as you continue to harvest, it'll keep branching and giving more and more attention to those side shoots to get bigger and bushier and more vibrant. And with flower deadheading, when it comes to flowers like roses or calendula or something like that, if you pinch off the whole flower head, It's a little different. This isn't really a very good example here from this one, but here, if you were just to pinch off that whole flower head, there might be a few little green bits on that. You could even, pinch down a little further if there's a stem there. But by pinching off those flowers, that's going to basically deadhead the flowers, and it's going to encourage the plant to be like, oh, I didn't get a chance to make seeds, so I need to make more flowers because I want to make more seeds because I didn't get the chance to do it. Somebody harvested my flowers. So you'll end up with fresh flowers for a longer period of time if you're periodically removing flowers. I usually don't remove all of the flowers because I want to leave some for my garden to look pretty, and I want to leave some for those pollinators, and I also want to leave some so that it will self-seed in the future. But if you're periodically harvesting those flowers, you can make medicine with them, but it also is another way to encourage the plants to continue growing. So sometimes I'll go through and I'll just kind of like trim trim leaves in specific spots, trim off those branches, pinch them off, and get my medicine that way. If I have like a lot of plant, like holy basil, I'll pinch off at the beginning of the year, but then as time goes on, the plants get bushier and bushier, and I'll have like this whole big stand of holy basil in my garden. And it's not really practical for me to go in and like snip individually for each stem that I want to harvest. So then what I'll do is what I call the bad haircut method. And so I'll pull together like a whole bunch of the plant all together, and then I'll just take my garden scissors, which are just these like kitchen scissors here, and I'll just kind of like cut across. And I want to make sure that I leave at least a couple sets of leaves behind on the plant, because I don't want to, I want the plant to still be able to make chlorophyll and have energy and keep growing. And it will, with that method, look kind of haggard afterwards. You'll have some stems, instead of being trimmed here, it might be trimmed like up here. And so you have this like sort of silly looking stem. It's like when a kid cuts their bangs looking out, but then the plants grow back and they'll cover that up. But that can be another great way to harvest your plants, especially something like lemon balm or thyme or something like that, where it's really just not that practical to be there trimming each individual stem of the plant. So that's pretty much how you would harvest. There are a few plants, like this is lemongrass here, where it doesn't really branch per se. It's just like growing one, big leaf or one big section of leaves out of the ground. Chives would be like this. Even parsley, you may not realize it, but parsley, each one of those stems is just like one leaf growing out. And so for those, what I'll do is I'll trim those off right at the base of the plant, but I won't take all of them. I'll just harvest a couple, and I'll leave, maybe 2/3 or at the very least 1/3, but usually I'll leave at least 2/3 of the leaves behind on the plant. And so I'll harvest the other ones. And if there's anything that's kind of icky looking, you can remove that. Usually we don't wash our plants before we make medicine with them, because if we wash them, it's going to make them harder to dry, or it's going to add water material to our remedies, which could dilute them and ferment and go bad. Or if you are using hot water, you might actually start kind of like making a tea of the plant before you get to make your remedy. And so you might lose some properties. So we don't normally wash our plants after we harvest them. So you want to start with plants that are already pretty clean. If they're in your garden, you could always go and like hose them off earlier in the day. If they've got sand or something on them, let them dry, while they're standing in the ground still, and then go back later and harvest them once they're totally dry. And if they're really, really dirty, you could do like the lettuce technique, where you're, dunking them in cold water and then putting them through a salad spinner and then letting them air dry. But normally we don't wash plants. We just work with good, happy plants to begin with. So that's a little bit about harvesting. Sometimes you're harvesting fruits or seeds or barks or roots, but we're not going to focus on that today. Once you've got your plants harvested and you're drying them, there are a couple different ways you could dry them. You want to make sure that there's good airflow, because especially in a humid environment, which New Hampshire can often be in the summertime, Air drying might not get your herbs totally dry. And if they're just sitting in a pile and there's not a lot of airflow, they can actually ferment and get moldy while you're quote unquote drying them. And so that's definitely not something that we want to happen. So you can either add heat and in a dehumidifying environment right away, like a dehydrator, or you can start things off by air drying them either on a screen like this. I've got these hanging screens that I just set up in my dining room out of the way, where I make sure there's not a lot of light getting to the plants. And I'll just do a thin layer on the screen. And then I actually put a little small kitchen fan underneath to make sure that they get good airflow, because especially where I am, we just don't get a lot of breeze here, and we don't use air conditioning, so it's not really dry in here as a general rule. So I want to make sure to keep that airflow going. So I'll get them most of the way dry, but because we don't use air conditioning and we live in humid, damp New Hampshire, what I'll do is once they're mostly dry, then I'll put them in a brown paper bag and just kind of loosely pack them and cinch it shut and put it in the windshield of my car and use my car as a dehydrator. And you could start with the car method, but you just have to be more careful because it could be too hot or too stagnant inside of the car. But once they're mostly dry, that actually works really well. They'll crisp up usually within a few hours, and then they're dry and I can garble them and make tea with them and store them. You could just put them in the brown paper bag from the start and put that in the windshield. Make sure not to overpack it and check on it, every half day or so, fluff it around. You may need to crack the windows if it's a, really hot day so that they don't steam in the bag instead of drying in the bag. But that brown paper bag method works better than you would expect. And it's a lot bigger of a dehydrator versus an actual dehydrator. If you do have access to an actual dehydrator, I use the Excalibur one is the one I have, but there are some other brands out there as well. You want to set it between 95 and 110 degrees. If it's humid, you might need to be more like 100 to 105. I find that again, in my humid ecosystem, 95 degrees is just not sufficient to dry herbs at the peak of the season. It's just too humid, but you can compensate for that with a little bit of extra heat. You just don't want to cook them too much. Don't use a cheap dehydrator, like the round ones that people use for making jerky and fruit leather. They get too hot for drying herbs. Like when you're drying fruits and meats and things, that requires a higher temperature, but we don't want to use that high of a temp for plants, or they just won't dry very well. Let me see if there are any questions here. What is the name of the plant you're drying with the purple flowers? We're actually going to talk about that one. This one is Korean licorice mint, which is very closely related to Anise Hyssop. And it's one of the 4, 5, 6 herbs that we're going to talk about today. I also have little chocolate mint, which is a variety of peppermint, and calendula, which I don't think I included in tonight's lecture. I was debating, but it's another really great herb to grow. If you're doing flowers, that's usually when I personally tend to use my dehydrator most, is for flowers and also for fruits and fruit leathers. And so for flowers, you're going to want to do a single layer, and you really want to make sure they're totally dry through the middle. It's just really important with your plants, if you're drying them to store them, that they're completely and totally dry. And flowers can be tricky because they're, the middles don't dry as easily as the petals do. And so you might want to break them up. And the same thing with your plants. When they're dry, they should really crinkle almost like a potato chip bag. And they should just really crumble easily with your hands. And if there's any kind of bendiness, or if you're trying to remove the leaves from the stems and there's some resistance, then the plant still has moisture in it and it's not dry enough for storing. But for the most part, I don't really think it's necessary to get a dehydrator unless you're planning on doing a lot of drying of, flowers and fruits and things like that, because they are pretty expensive. They use electricity, they take up a lot of space, and they fill up so fast that they're just, if you're doing a lot of drying from the garden, it's just not always as practical as I would like to be. So here's calendula again. We've got some fresh calendula, and then we have some dry calendula. And garbling is that process of once your herbs are totally dry, of removing the leaves from the stems and crunching them up into smaller pieces. And so I pretty much just talked about that, but there is a little link for a Facebook video that you can check out where I'm garbling Korean licorice mint, and you can hear how like crispy it is. So if you want to, you can check that out on the slides PDF. Once you've harvested and dried your herbs, you want to store them in a cool, dark, dry spot, and that's going to protect it from going bad. When they're in the sun or exposed to moisture or light or air, that will all increase the pace at which it starts to lose its potency. And it could even like ferment and go bad, depending upon, say, how much moisture it had. With most of our remedies, you can also store those like herbal tinctures, which are alcohol extracts, vinegars, herbal honey extracts, those kinds of things. You can also store them in a cool, dark, dry spot. You could also put them in the fridge if it's something that's like kind of sort of stable, like syrups are not really shelf stable. Vinegar extracts are mostly shelf stable. Oxymels, which are vinegar and honey combined, are mostly stable. But if it's something that you kind of aren't sure about, which would be almost everything besides alcohol extracts and dried herbs, you could always store those in the fridge or the freezer if you wanted to make sure that they were like extra well stored. But I don't personally store dry herbs in the fridge or the freezer because it's too humid, and it's not necessary to store alcohol extracts in the freezer or the fridge. Could I recommend a good dehydrator? Yes, the Excalibur is the one that I have used. That's the one that was in the other picture. And that's the one I'm familiar with. I know there are some other ones out there, and maybe there are other ones that are less expensive, because I think I spent like $500 on the Excalibur dehydrator, and that was probably like 15 years ago. I don't know if they've gone up or down in price since then, but it's expensive, which is the downside, the biggest downside to them. But it does work really well, and you can adjust the temperature on it, which is really nice. And so I do use it for making fruit leathers and dehydrating fruits and vegetables. And I could use it for jerky, but I haven't really made jerky, but you just can adjust the temperature accordingly. But you can also use it for herbs. So yes, I can write the Excalibur. So it's like Excalibur, like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, Excalibur sword, same thing. Excalibur is how you spell that. So I'm not going to go into dosing, but I do have kind of a general dosing slide that you can check out. And then also on my blog, I have more details on how to make different recipes. So again, you can check that out in the slides. And now we've got like about 30-40 minutes. I want to talk about a couple of my favorite herbs that you might want to grow. So first and foremost, we have the question already about what is that beautiful purple herb that was drying in the photo. This is Korean licorice mint. It is very closely related to Anise Hyssop. They're almost impossible to tell one from the other from looking at them. Supposedly there are subtle differences, but I think they also interbreed quite a bit. And so I will grow them both in my yard, and sometimes it's hard to tell. You might notice that there are slight differences, but nothing that's really obvious. They can vary a bit in flavor. Again, I suspect that this is because of the interbreeding that they do, but generally speaking, I find that Anise Hyssop, which is sometimes called licorice mint, or Agastache funiculum is the Latin name. Anise Hyssop tends to have a little bit sharper and mintier of a flavor, while also having a bit of a fennel anise flavor. Whereas the Korean licorice mint, which is sometimes also called Korean mint, and it's the Agastache rugosa, tends to have more of a soft honey fennel flavor. But this can really vary quite a bit. So if you are purchasing or getting them from somebody else's garden, because they do self-seed, they're easy to grow from seed, and they're also they self-seed pretty readily, I would sniff them and taste them and look for ones that smell and taste the best. Or if you're in a garden center that happens to have a lot of different Agastache species and varieties, sniff them and smell them. And it's these two that are really very similar. There are a lot of other really yummy and some also more just ornamental Agastache species that you could use as well. But like there's a tutti frutti one. But the ones that I'm really talking about today that look like this are the Agastache rugosa and the Agastache funiculum. Medicinally, they're basically interchangeable. And like I said, there can be a lot of variability in the flavor from plant to plant, variety to variety. I personally love the ones that have more of that softer honey fennel flavor. And those are the ones that I generally personally prefer using. And the main reason I love working with Korean licorice mint is because it's delicious and it's also beautiful. And it is just a really delightful herb to have in the garden. It does have medicinal action, so I will talk about that in a moment. But really, I just enjoy the flavor. It's very sweet, just naturally sweet. It's got that honey fennel flavor that's really very pleasant on its own, but it also blends really, really well with other herbs, whether you're making an herbal tea. I'll often add that to the mix if I want a little sweetness and a little bit of a licoricey fennel flavor. I also love combining it with the flavors of vanilla. And you can work with it fresh or dried. You can make recipes with it, or you can just, make tea, water extracts. You can eat it. There's just so many different ways that you can work with it. It's just really delicious and extracts and keeps very nicely in all those forms. And so one of my favorite things to do with it once it starts to grow up a little bit more is as it starts to flower, I'll pinch off a few leaves and some flowers, and I'll put them in a clear glass bottle, and I'll cover it with either plain water, cold, or plain seltzer water, cold. And within about 15 to 30 minutes, it gives a really nice flavor to that water or seltzer. It's very light, very sweet, very aromatic. And often I'll add like just a little bit of vanilla extract to it. I love the brand of vanilla that I like the most is the Simply Organic one from the Co-op, which vanilla's gotten really expensive. So I wait for it to go on sale and then I buy several bottles of it. And then I even store it in a little dropper bottle so that I can squirt it into seltzer and other things. And so I'll do the vanilla extract with the Korean licorice mint in the seltzer, and it tastes kind of like root beer. It's really yummy. It looks really pretty. That's one of the reasons I like to use the glass bottle, is that I can see the flowers in there, and that just makes me really happy in the summertime while I'm cooling off with my refreshing beverage. It's always really popular to bring to parties. I do herbal seltzers a lot, and you could add sweetener, but I usually don't. And they're just really fun. We do drink alcohol in our house, but we try not to drink much of it. And we don't really do much in the way of soda because we're usually trying to have less sugar. And so having herbal seltzers can be a great fun way to refresh or to bring beverages to a party and have something, else to drink besides sugar or alcohol or boring plain old water. So this is one of my favorite herbs for that. It's also great in tea, as I mentioned. You can use the fresh leaves and add them to food. It's really nice in salads. You can throw it into stir fries. You can take the whole leaves. They're like kind of pretty and sort of heart shaped. And you can put those when you're making fresh spring rolls and wrap with veggies, and they'll add a little hit of like herbaceous licoricey flavor to that. Great with like basil leaves and mint leaves and cilantro leaves. So lots of really great ways that you can work with it. You can dry it and use the leaves in place of fennel seeds in your cooking. It kind of tastes a little bit like that kind of sausagey fennel flavor that people are used to. And you can also dry the flowers. The flowers are actually a little sweeter than the leaves are, but if you're cooking with it, then the flower texture might be a little bit off-putting. But I love drying it with some of the flowers on it because it dries pretty well, and it's even a little bit sweeter than the leaves are. So medicinally, Korean licorice mint and Anise Hyssop have a bit of a history of use. They're almost impossible to find in commercial herbal medicine. Like you're not going to find them in most tea places. They're hard to find from bulk places, you really have to grow it or get it directly from a farm. And Korean licorice mint is almost impossible to find, but the Anise Hyssop you might find from a couple different herbal local farms. And I do have on here some different sources. So Heartwood Forest Farm is a place that I think is in Michigan, but they sell the dried herb and the seeds from my plants that I sent them seeds, and now they're growing them and selling the seeds. And Warner River Farm in Webster, New Hampshire does a bunch of markets in the Concord area, and he usually sells both Anise Hyssop and Korean licorice mint. And I don't know if he's growing my seeds or not, but I gave him some seeds too. Since I don't sell commercial, I really want to get the plants I like to other people who do sell commercially to send people to. Medicinally, a lot of my understanding of this comes from traditional Chinese medicine and from traditional Korean medicine, which isn't my ancestry and it's not a lot of my training, but because it was a hard plant to find information on, I was appreciative that I could get some information from those traditions. And so this is a digestive herb, as many plants in the mint family are. This is in the mint family. And so it supports digestion. It's a carminative. So carminative herbs are herbs that are aromatic, that often have sort of a relaxing antispasmodic effect on the musculature. Some are also nervous system relaxants too, but this one's a little less of that. It's more of a digestive and respiratory system relaxant. And carminatives also often tend to increase digestive juices and function. And I love Korean licorice mint because it stimulates digestion, but it doesn't overstimulate it in the same way that, say, peppermint might do. And it tends to be really nice for quelling a sour stomach or a cough, or if you've got like a little bit of tummy upset, it's a really nice herb for that. It is traditionally used as a throat tonic. I really should have thought ahead and made a tea of it for tonight. But I often do, I'll take like marshmallow, which is soothing and sweet, and marshmallow, the herb marshmallow, and Korean licorice mint, and maybe other herbs. And I'll sometimes make a tea for when I'm teaching so that it soothes my throat because I tend to get dried out. And it's a nice herb too if you've got like an infection that's brewing in the lungs. I might also use stronger remedies like oregano or thyme or bee balm that are really more antimicrobial punch. But Korean licorice mint is nice too, and it softens the flavor of those somewhat harsher herbs. Some people do consider it a little bit of a nervine, which is like relaxing the nervous system and supporting the nervous system. I don't really tend to find it does that as much, at least for me and my clients, but there are other herbs that I turn to more for that. And if you have them cold, if you make like an iced tea, or you do those infused seltzers or infused cold waters with the fresh or the dry plant, a lot of times that's when you consume it in a cold beverage, it can help act as a refrigerant and to cool us off on a hot day. So it's a really nice summer beverage. And as I mentioned, it's just really delicious. Let's see, does Korean mint grow abundantly like other mints? That's a great question. So it does grow abundantly, but it doesn't have the same growth pattern that your like mentha mint plants do, like peppermint and spearmint. So those plants tend to just like overtake by underground root runners. Korean licorice mint just stays put where you planted it, and it will get bigger for a couple of years. And then usually after the second or third year, it dies. It's a short-lived perennial, but it self-seeds. So it doesn't grow so much by underground. It doesn't grow at all by underground root runners. What it does is it seeds itself throughout the garden, but it's very easy to pull up. So if you decide that you want to move it or that you want to just get rid of it, you can just pull them up. It's really easy to do. And they're beautiful. So most people don't really mind, but they are rampant self-seeders. So they do spread, but they don't spread the same way. And they're nowhere near as difficult to remove as your more traditional mints would do. So you can definitely play around with that in the garden. I've got on the slides I've got my chat box kind of covering it up, but it's hard to have so many things going on one screen. But I've got some growing tips on the slides, and also just kind of like the energetics or the key points and actions around it, the flavors and things. But this is a plant that really what it likes most, I find, is good soil. It would be very happy in a veggie bed, and it likes good compost rich soil with some good drainage. It's very happy in full sun as long as it has those things. It's also very happy in part shade as long as it has those things. I have some that are in my main garden, it's all pampered with drip irrigation and full sun, and they do great. But then I have others that are on the side of my house in decent soil that I've built up. You know, all herbs are going to like decent soil usually, at least these ones. And as long as it's getting that like part shade, it seems to do okay, even if it's not getting watered and having good soil. If it's in a really dry, sandy spot with full sun, they do get really stunted in that environment, at least the ones that the Korean licorice mint that I grow tends to. But you can also grow them in containers. I would do, if you're doing containers for any of these plants, I would do like a good size container. Make sure you've got really good quality soil in it and make sure that it doesn't get too dried out, because that's something that containers can get dried out really easily. So any other questions about Korean licorice mint before I jump on to the next one? And if you ever happen to be here, I'm happy to set you up with babies. Mine did start to interbreed. I had some Anise Hyssop and Korean licorice mint, and they started to interbreed. And unfortunately, last year I lost my sense of smell last early spring with a COVID infection. It's still a little wonky, but it's definitely getting better. But one of my jobs for this year is going to be assessing all of my self-seeding baby plants so that I can cull the ones that I don't like the flavors from as much. But Warner River Farm will most likely be selling them in the Concord area at farmers markets. You can order them ahead and he'll bring them to the market, or Jim will also be selling them at Urban Garden Day, usually. So I would check with him ahead just to make sure he brings them for you. So holy basil, Tulsi, this is another awesome plant. And this is one that many of you probably already know. Let's see how many we have, like almost 50 people. So I'm curious, feel free to raise your hand. How many of you have already heard about holy basil? And I know you don't have your cameras on, but there should be like an emoji thing under the little 3 dots. I see a couple of hands going up. Awesome. Some thumbs up. Great. So this is a really lovely plant that's still pretty new to Western herbalism. It's mostly most of our understanding of it in Western herbalism is coming from Ayurveda and India. However, it does have a history of use in other areas throughout Southeast Asia. I've met folks from places like Vietnam who have a history of use around holy basil. I've also seen it growing when I was in Guatemala. It was one of the plants that was growing in the gardens there. And it also comes from Africa. And there are actually a couple different species and varieties of basil that are within the sort of holy basil group. The Latin name you'll most often come across is Ocimum sanctum. That's the traditional Latin name for the main varieties and species of holy basil used. The newer version of that name, they've actually updated the name, is Ocimum tenuiflorum. So it's actually the same species, just a new name. And there are a couple others too. There's like a Ocimum gratissimum, which is the Tulsi vana, and that's got somewhat similar uses. And then there's this one here that I grow. It's the one that I love the most. You can get it from a lot of the different herb growers throughout New Hampshire, and a lot of the seed houses are starting to grow it. And they might even just call it holy basil or sacred basil or Tulsi and not tell you what kind, or they might label it as Kapoor or temperate Tulsi. And I think I have that on, right here on the slide, Kapoor or temperate Tulsi. That's the one that's the easiest to grow in abundance in New Hampshire. You can grow any of them, but this one tends to really thrive in a more temperate ecosystem versus like the really hot and humid ecosystem of India. And so this is the one that I tend to grow. And while you will find it sometimes listed as Ocimum sanctum or Ocimum tenuiflorum, we're starting to think that it's actually a variety of Ocimum africanum, so from Africa, and which is like a lemon clove basil. But this particular holy basil, they have this very clovey, bubblegummy, slightly minty flavor, and all the different species and varieties are used relatively similarly. But this Kapoor or temperate one is the one that's the easiest to find, and it's the one that's easiest to grow. It's the one that I have my own personal experience with. So I'd love for folks to share with this or any of the plants. If you have a personal story from working with them that you want to share, go ahead and put that in the chat box and I'm happy to read it. But I will start in by saying that holy basil or Tulsi or sacred basil really, really lovely for supporting the nervous system. It is a bit of an adaptogenic herb. So adaptogens are herbs that help us adapt to stress. Basically, it improves our response to stress. So instead of just going really easily into that fight or flight mode, we go into this sort of like mode of readiness without being like over the top fight or flight mode. And that can be really nice because most of us could use a little extra stress support. But holy basil is also a nervine, and nervines are herbs that support our nervous system by nourishing it and balancing it, and sometimes being a little bit on the calming side, especially restorative nervine, which is what this plant also is. And so I love that holy basil is a little bit energizing, but also a little bit calming. It can do both those things at the same time and just put us in this sort of Zen-like state. I think of when you watch like Kung Fu movies and you see the Kung Fu master, like in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon back in the day when that movie was popular. And, you know, the enemy is like just, you know, going crazy trying to fight. But the master is just, you know, able to deftly like maneuver and avoid those blows, while to be able to be on task and able to get things done without going into like super duper stress mode. And most of us could use that, especially these days, but in general. It's also a little bit of a hypoglycemic herb. It helps with lowering blood sugar a little bit. And it does that partly by working on the stress hormone cortisol. When we are stressed, our cortisol tends to kick in. And one of the jobs of cortisol, besides putting us in a stress mode, is also to increase our blood sugar. And so our body uses cortisol when we're stressed because it thinks you need to fight or flee and you need fuel, and fuel for the body is generally in the form of glucose or sugar. And so it's like, you're stressed, you need fuel so that you can fight or flee. So we're going to take sugar out of storage and put it into the bloodstream. Well, that doesn't really serve us very well, since most of our stressors these days are not things that we're physically fighting or fleeing from. And so when we're stressed a lot, our blood sugar can start to go up. Also, our body uses cortisol when our blood sugar just is getting low, like if it's the middle of the night and your blood sugar is tanking, or if it's the middle of the day and you haven't eaten and your blood sugar is going low, your body will actually kick up cortisol to bring in some blood sugar so that it can keep things a little bit more stable. But at the same time, because it's also a stress hormone, it can put us in a little bit of that like fight or flight sort of mode at the same time. So holy basil is one of my favorite herbs for when folks are stressed and also having blood sugar issues, and also maybe having cravings, especially for sugar. And for that, I really like pairing it with when you're eating. So if you're having it with your breakfast or with your dinner, it's going to help you deal with the blood sugar of what you're consuming, as well as stress at the same time. On the flip side, if you have unsweetened holy basil, especially like a big cup of tea of holy basil unsweetened on an empty stomach, between meals, that kind of thing, it could actually make you go too low on blood sugar. And so if you are wanting to work with holy basil for like the stress benefits, and you were going to be consuming it not with food, I would add a little bit of honey or a little bit of some sort of sweetness, or take it with a little bit of a snack, especially if you're prone to hypoglycemia. But if you're trying to support lower blood sugar, then definitely have it unsweetened, but with your meal, when you're eating carbohydrates. So let's see, we have some comments here. Should I receive a link to the recording of this program? Awesome. I hope so. I think Zane will be sending you a link, and if not, you can email the co-op and they will send you a link, but it will also get posted on the co-op's YouTube channel. And so probably, I don't know how long that takes. Zane can tell us at the end, but usually like maybe a week or so later, you can go on the co-op's YouTube channel and you can just get the video that way as well. I might share it through my avenues as well once it's out. And then Roberta says, I took a couple of your in-person classes several years ago and you got me hooked on herbs, especially the Korean licorice mint. I did get a plant and my granddaughter ate all the leaves, laugh out loud. And I have gotten organic seeds and have started several plants. I keep them hidden from her. Awesome. I'm glad you're enjoying them. So a little bit more about holy basil. So those are the main things that I tend to work with it for stress, for calming, but also energizing at the same time, and for blood sugar and craving support. but it is like many mint family plants, including like mints and Korean licorice mint. It is aromatic, it's carminative, it's antimicrobial, it's digestive, it is an immune supportive herb. It does have some, I mean, I wouldn't rely on it solely, but it does seem to have some anti-cancer activity. It is also a nootropic. I don't know if I have that word on here, but nootropic, it basically means a smart drug or smart herb. So it's one of our mint family herbs that tends to be really good at supporting brain function and mental clarity and focus. But I will caution you that different people respond differently to holy basil. And so some people, when they have holy basil, they feel like energized and they're like good to go. And they're like, I couldn't take that at nighttime. I would be too zipped up. And then other people take it and they feel really calm and blissed out. And some people even feel a little bit like they would call it a little high when they have holy basil. And they might say like, this is a cool feeling and all, but I wouldn't want to be like this when I was at work during the day. And then in very rare cases, some people actually feel a little bit anxious from it, which more often people find it really helpful for anxiety and depression and things like that, to just kind of lift up the spirits, but calm anxiety at the same time. But there are some people who have sort of the reverse effect. So try a little bit of it first and see how you specifically respond to it. And also know that a lot of the commercial dried holy basil on the market is not the best quality. So if you can get it from your own garden or you can get it directly from a farm, the quality is amazing compared to what you would find in like the international herbal market. I'm sure that what's actually in India is fantastic, but what's coming to us like to the United States from India is not always. I do like the company Organic India. They make some really nice teas, and but I like the homegrown even better. But when I first started working with it, I was working with the Organic India teas. And I can share another story about this one before, a couple stories about holy basil tea before I move on to the next herb. So one is my own. So way back in the day when I was working at the Concord Food Co-op and running their supplement department, it was a really stressful job. I was the only one in the department, and I would like often just keep working through my lunch breaks, which wasn't very healthy and not really recommended, but there was just so much work to do and it was just me. And I don't know if they still do it, but there's an organic bread company that also delivers the coffee cup donuts to the gas stations. And so we would get the donuts delivered to our back room, which we would never sell because they're full of junk. And when you're really stressed and busy and you don't have time to eat properly, what do you want? Like donuts are like, seem like the perfect food to your cravings. And I would not normally eat donuts, but at that time I was eating 1 or 2 donuts a day, almost every day, which was definitely not good for my body, but willpower is not my strong suit. And so I was working in the department. We started carrying the Organic India tea at that time. And so I just started making a tea blend. And at the time I would use a tea bag of the Organic India holy basil tea and a tea bag of the Numi jasmine green tea, which I love. And I would do the 2 of those with my breakfast. And I'd noticed immediately that I was less stressed at work, and that when lunchtime came around, I had the capacity to be like, you know what? I don't want a donut. Like I should clock out and have a lunch with like salad and protein and complex carbohydrates in their more natural format. And so it became really easy because I just was craving healthier food, and I was much better able to turn down the sweets and the treats than I normally would be otherwise, especially in that stressed state. So that was my story. I also have a client who has diabetes and stress, and she runs her own business and is just super busy. And so one of the things that she has found that's been really helpful for her, among many different things that she does, is she has an evening tea of holy basil and lemon balm, and she's getting them directly from the farm, so it's really, really good quality. And so you can also easily grow and dry your own for these as well. And so she makes a tea with that and has it with her dinner. And she finds that when she does that, she's, less stressed after work, that her blood sugar remains a lot more stable throughout the night, and that she's just better able to manage both her stress and her blood sugar. I also noticed that if I have this as a tea, the holy basil and the lemon balm, particularly lemon balm's one of the herbs I'll mention shortly, that's also a little bit relaxing. So having that at night, I also find that it really helps if you're somebody who, like me, can be a little bit more anxious or maybe have a hard time sleeping. I'm a bit of a hyper vigilant person after having been stalked a few times. And so, every little noise with my husband's away is like, what's that sound? What's that sound? And when I have holy basil and lemon balm at night, I just like, it takes that down a notch, which is really, really nice. So that's a little bit about that. I'm not too concerned about thyroid. There are some animal studies to suggest that it might have an inhibiting effect on thyroid, but I haven't seen that in my clinical practice. And I see a lot of clients who have thyroid stuff. And there are some concerns with might inhibit fertility a little bit. So, and it's also not appropriate in pregnancy. So if you are pregnant or trying to get pregnant, I probably wouldn't do holy basil during that time. But, beyond that, it's usually pretty safe. And there are a lot of companies that sell this. High Mowing Organic Seeds sells the seeds. Warner River sells the plants. Beefield Farm sells the dried herb as well as the seedlings. Foundwell Farm, which is in Pembroke, sells the seedlings. Good Earth Farm, which sometimes sells seedlings through the co-op, sells the seedlings. So a lot of our local organic growers do sell this plant. So we have a comment here. Let me go back to that slide. So Laurel says, I love Tulsi tea from Beefields Farm in Wilton, New Hampshire. They are often at the Concord Farmers Market the winter and summer. Yes, I love Leor. She's amazing. And her holy basil, like you can get it straight up, you can get it in different remedies, or you can get it in tea blends. And it's just wonderful. It's one of the really good ones, good sources. I don't think the co-op carries it. I know that she's not really set up for a wholesale to retail outlets, but she sells it direct. And I think she's actually on a little bit of a sabbatical at the moment, but her family is still running the farm while she's off exploring. So, but she does have some really great teas. So lemon balm, this is another one that's really easy to grow. On the note of holy basil, you grow that just like regular culinary basil. It likes it to be hot. It likes good soil. It likes regular moisture. It does not like to get really stagnant, but it also doesn't like to get dried out. So regular moisture, but good drainage, just like your regular culinary basils. And it will not tolerate frost. So you have to wait until it's warming up out to put it in the garden, and then it will die with the first frost. So, but when it's 90, 100 degrees in the middle of the summer and your whole garden is flopping over, this is a plant from Africa, India, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, Central America. It's going to be like, bring it. That's exactly what it loves. And you just keep pinching back those flowers, use the flowers for medicine and tea and water, and you'll get a really nice big bushy plant as time goes on. Lemon balm, really lovely plant. And this is one that a lot of people already grow because it's really easy to cultivate and it's a perennial, so it will usually come back. Sometimes if you get a cold winter or you just don't have a lot of snow to protect the plants, you might find that in the spring it's died off, but then you might find that babies pop up elsewhere. But usually it comes back each year, and it's very lemony, like lemon pledge. And it has some similar properties to the holy basil. It's also it's yet another mint family plant. And this one does grow more like your regular mints, where it will grow by underground root runners. And so it can get a little bit weedy, usually not as bad as your other mints. And sometimes it will self-seed as well. But it's nice. It's a plant that I love that it grows abundantly because there are so many great ways to work with it. I will go through gallons of it at my apothecary sometimes. I don't sell herbs to the general public, but I do sometimes make custom blends for my clients. I'm not seeing clients right now, or at least I'm not seeing new clients right now. So the perennial, it's lemon pledgy, it's calming. So this herb's not an adaptogen. It doesn't seem to work as much on the stress hormones directly, but It is a nervine. It does support and nourish and help restore the nervous system. It has a little bit more of a calming action, but it's also uplifting, and it's also good at supporting focus and cognition. So I love that it's calming without being too sedating for most people. And you can play around with the dose, because sometimes if you take a really high dose, it's more sedating. And so you can see what is most appropriate for the time of day that you're working with it. But it's a really nice one for just taking things down a notch without over sedating. So if folks are feeling anxious, agitated, angry, frustrated, inattentive, hyperactive, lemon balm is often a really nice herb to just kind of bring that down, but also still uplift and improve cognition, clarity, and focus at the same time. Because it is calming, it can be used at night to help with support sleep, but you can also take it during the daytime. And there's that word I said before, that nootropic or nootropic. It basically means smart drug or cognitive enhancing herb. There are quite a few studies on the cognition supporting side, going all the way from like kids who have ADHD, kids who are more neurotypical, adults and seniors and elders who are dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's. So, all different age ranges, all different kinds of cognitive stuff going on. And it seems to be really helpful for everything and all of the above. And it usually is pretty fast acting. That's true for most of the mint family herbs, that you can use them on a regular basis for further benefits, but oftentimes you'll see some benefit within a few minutes to an hour or so, which is really nice. It is not as much as holy basil, but it is a mild hypoglycemic. So it does also support blood sugar, especially if you're having it like as a cup of tea and you're having it unsweetened. It is also a little bit astringent, so that gives it a little bit of a tannic quality. So not bad as a dried herb in place of like green tea or black tea, if you want to have that little bit of like astringency like you would from those herbs. It doesn't have caffeine or anything like that, like green tea would. It is a mild digestive bitter and a mild carminative. So these are actions of herbs that stimulate digestion. And some people find it really helpful when they're having indigestion, some forms of acid reflux, if the acid reflux is due to low stomach acid, or feeling a little bit more anxious, that nervous indigestion. Lemon balm can be really nice for that. And it is also fantastic as a antiviral for herpes, and maybe also for other viral infections like cold and flu, and maybe even COVID. There's really not a lot of research on that, but there are some herbalists who are using it that way. And it's not a miracle, but it does seem to be supportive. So I wouldn't say that it's curing anything, but it seems to help support. For herpes, what it seems to do is it goes in and helps block the virus out of the cell and reduce how much that virus can break into cells, reprogram cells to make more viruses and have that virus spread. So they seem to be helpful for reducing the viral load, especially at that really early onset. So if somebody's feeling that first little tickle of a cold sore and they apply a little bit of lemon balm topically, and you can also take it internally too, but especially applying it directly to the area that's affected, a lot of folks find that that works really, really well. Oddly enough, while I do love working with it as a fresh plant tincture, I get reports back from students and clients that most of the brands, even the brands I would normally love for tinctures, just don't work as well. So this is a really good one to make your own, or to go to somebody else's garden who has it and make it out of their garden. Really easy to make your own tinctures. I have a blog with a short video that you could check out on my website for that. Under the blog and herbal remedies, it's in there. Or you can just probably Google Maria Noel Groves and tincture, and you can probably find it through Google that way. So you just basically shove a lot of plant material in a jar, cover it with high proof alcohol, let it sit for a month, and then strain it out. And you've got your own tincture. Really easy to make. And that's great for all the same things that we just talked about here. It loses a lot of its potency once it dries. So I mostly like working with it as a tincture, but I do still enjoy it as a tea, even though it loses a lot of its lemoniness and its oomph. And even as a tincture, I think it's best used within a couple years, whereas most tinctures will last for like 10 years. This is one that starts to lose its potency within like 2-3 years or so. So refreshing periodically is nice. And I see that I am at time. So I'm going to kind of wrap things up, but I welcome questions. So feel free to put them in the chat box and I'll answer them before we close out. I want to let you know that there is another slide on bee balm, which is a great herb for like oregano, thyme, antimicrobial action. Marshmallow, which is an herb that I really, really adore growing for the digestive system, for soothing and sliming and coating the respiratory system as well as the digestive system. And I love making tea with both the leaf and the root, but I harvest the leaves the most often. And I also have a little bonus slide on black elderberry. And really that's one you're going to have to wait a couple of years before you can get a harvest from, but it's a fun one to grow. And then there's even more online. So feel free to check that out. And just little extra slides on how to make remedies, but there's even more on my blog that you can check out. And I also have different places to get herbs. Don't forget about Urban Garden Day. A lot of really great growers go there, including Warner River Farm, and grows a lot of these. By mail, where to buy high quality herbal products, which of course the co-op for a lot of these ready-made things, you can get them there. But these are some of the brands that I really like, especially like these bigger brands lists. Not all, but many of these are sold at the Concord Food Co-op. Books, lots of books, of course, my book. Besides my book, I really love The Healing Garden by Juliette Blankespore that just came out, as well as Organic Medicinal Herb Farmer for more like technical information by Jeff and Melanie Carpenter at Zach Woods Herb Farm. And regular herb book favorites. And another plug for my upcoming series, which starts in just a couple weeks and is filling up. And I will leave it at that, but let me see what we have for questions. So let's see. Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear that everybody liked it. Roberta said, my holy basil plants die back in winter, but they come back every spring. You know, I have heard that holy basil can self-seed and come back. Mine have never. I don't know if it's because my roaming chickens in wintertime eat all the seeds or what, or because I'm just that little bit colder than most of the rest of New Hampshire. But I have heard for some people that their holy basil does self-seed. So I'm excited to hear that that works for you. And the replay will definitely be available as long as there are no technical glitches on the co-op's YouTube page. It might take a couple days. I'll let Zane talk a little bit more about that, and hopefully he will also email it to you, but if not, you can find it there. And I think that's all the questions. So Zane, did you have any last things you wanted to say or ask?
Yeah, so I see a couple people have asked about the recording. It does take a little bit for us to make that nice and pretty for everyone, but we should hope to have that on our YouTube page by the middle to end of next week. I'm happy to email it to everyone that attended, and then we'll be posting it on our social medias as well. If you're interested in purchasing one of Maria's books, we do still carry them on the customer service counter. So if you walk in the front door and take an immediate right, they're both sitting on easels facing into the store. So feel free to come on by and grab those for some more Maria content. Our next class is still to be determined. We should have one next month. We're still nailing down the details about it, so I don't want to say something that's not going to be accurate in a week, but if you just keep checking our social medias, or we have in-store signage, and details about that class should be coming up shortly. We don't have donuts in our break room anymore, Maria, but I do kind of wish that we did. You know, it would be nice every now and then. But thank you so much to everyone who attended. Thank you so much to Maria. That was a wonderful class, and I hope that everyone has a great night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
If you're in the mood for real food, it's Concord Food Co-op.